What do you do when your wife screams why you don't want her, and you realize the name you say once can make her go pale, because she knows you already found out about Mike? My name is Cal Rourke, and this is a fictional story about what happens when a marriage turns into a ledger. I used to think desire was a simple problem with a simple fix, like a car that won't start because someone left the lights on. Then my wife stood in our kitchen, eyes bright with anger and need, and demanded to know what was wrong with me, why I didn't want her, why I kept pulling away like she was made of heat and I'd already been burned. The irony was clean enough to cut glass. For months, she'd been slipping out of my reach in small, practiced ways, and now she was furious I wouldn't run after her on command. I worked dispatch for a rideshare company. Not the glossy corporate side, not the ad copy, not the investor deck. I sit in a room full of screens and noise and people who think the world runs on urgency. My job is to keep patterns from breaking. When you do that long enough, you stop believing in accidents. You start seeing what everyone else calls coincidence as a person choosing the same lie over and over until it becomes a routine. That routine started 6 months ago with her late shifts. Tessa told me the same thing every time, as if repetition could make it true. Demand spike. Driver shortage. A manager begged her. It was always framed like she was being heroic for strangers. I believed her at first because I wanted to. Belief is lazy. It lets you keep your life. Then the little seams began to show. She stopped coming home tired. She came home wired. Not happy, not relaxed, not grateful. Wired like she'd been performing. Wired like she'd had to keep a mask in place for hours and couldn't wait to take it off on me. Her phone never left her hand. Even when she set it down, it faced down. Even when she showered, it stayed close enough that steam couldn't hide the screen from her eyes. And she started picking fights about nothing, which is how guilt manufactures distance. If she could make me the villain, she could justify anything that came next. The first time I noticed my own body pulling away, I thought it was stress. Dispatch will do that. Your head gets stuck in problems that don't end. You go home and your skin wants quiet. But it wasn't just stress. It was the way she looked at me now, like she was measuring what I could do for her instead of seeing who I was. She had started calling me controlling in front of other people. That was new. She said it with a smile, like a joke, but she didn't laugh. She'd glance at me afterward, watching to see if I would flinch. It was a test. A little shove to see if I would stumble. When I didn't, she got bolder. She began forgetting to tell me about events until the last minute. She'd say she'd mentioned it, and I must have missed it. When I asked what time she'd be home, she'd answer like I'd offended her by wanting a schedule in my own house. Then came the first real crack in the story. Receipts that didn't match the script. I didn't snoop through her purse like some cartoon husband. I didn't need to. We had a shared card for groceries and gas. One afternoon, a charge popped up that wasn't groceries or gas. A hotel bar tab, small enough to be dismissed, tagged at a place she'd never mentioned. I saw it while I was checking our balance, and my mind did what it always does. It placed the charge next to the date next to the story next to the route. Routes matter to me. Routes are my language. Tessa drove. She liked it. She said she liked the freedom, the independence, the fact she could choose her hours. What she never said out loud was that she liked being unseen. A driver is in everyone's space and no one's life. A driver can vanish into the city and come home with a practiced sigh, claiming fatigue as an explanation for everything. If I was a jealous man, I could have blown up the first time my gut tightened. But jealousy is sloppy. Jealousy makes you loud. Loud makes you easy to paint as unstable. I wasn't jealous. I was awake. So I started doing what I do best. I stopped chasing. I started counting. At first, it was simple and almost stupid. I watched the times she left, the times she returned. I wrote them down once or twice, then stopped because I didn't want to become the kind of man who lives in margins. But the pattern didn't let go. Friday nights. Tuesdays that were supposedly slow. Sundays that she claimed were the best for tips. Always the same stretch of time, always the same irritated mood when she came home. Then there was Mike. I didn't meet Mike in person at first. Mike arrived as a name that floated around her like perfume. She'd mention him while telling a story about work, then act like it meant nothing. She'd say he was a manager. She'd say he was helpful. She'd say he understood how hard she worked. She said it in that casual tone people use when they want you to swallow something without tasting it. One night she came home and her phone lit up on the counter while she was in the bathroom. Just a flash, a preview banner. I didn't pick it up. I didn't open anything. I saw the name and a few words, enough to make my stomach go cold. Mike. Tonight was good. That was all. That was enough. When she returned, I asked how her shift went. She said fine. She talked about traffic. She talked about rude passengers. She talked about tips. She didn't mention Mike. She didn't mention any good tonight. I watched her face while she talked, and I realized something that made my skin crawl. She was not lying because she was scared. She was lying because she was confident. She believed I would never connect the dots. The next morning, I sat at my small desk by the window and opened the driver weekly summary she'd proudly shown me in the past. She'd left it on the fridge once like a trophy, bragging about her earnings. It wasn't a secret document. It was the kind of thing a driver shares when they want praise. The summary didn't show everything, not in detail, but it showed enough. Time blocks, general zones, total trips. When you've stared at maps for a living, even vague zones can tell you where someone keeps returning. I printed the summary, set it next to my handwritten note of her alibi, and circled the same zone that kept appearing at the same times. Not downtown, not the airport, not the bar district. A quiet cluster of condos near the river where people went home, not out. I didn't need to follow her. I didn't need to track anything. I needed her own routine to betray her. And it did. 2 weeks after that, she tried to spark a fight in the kitchen, the kind she loved because it let her play wounded while she attacked. She accused me of not being present. She said I looked at her like she was a problem. She said she felt lonely. She said I was making her feel undesirable. And then she did it. She cornered me with heat and anger, and she asked why I didn't want her. She demanded an answer like I owed her a performance. I looked at her and felt something inside me settle into place, quiet and final. Because it wasn't that she was undesirable. It was that she was unsafe. Not physically, emotionally, morally. The kind of unsafe that makes your body refuse even if your mind tries to negotiate. I said Mike's name once. I didn't shout it. I didn't spit it. I said it the way you say a detail you already know, a detail you're giving the other person one chance to explain. Her face changed so fast it would have been funny if it didn't hurt. Her eyes widened first, then narrowed, as if she was trying to decide whether to deny or to attack. Her mouth opened and closed like she'd forgotten how to use it. Then she went pale, not the dramatic pale of movies, but the real pale of blood draining away. I learned more from that 2-second reaction than I could have learned from 100 forced confessions. People can lie with words. They can't lie with color. She tried to recover. She asked what I meant. She accused me of imagining things. She told me Mike was just her boss. She told me I was being paranoid. She told me I needed help. There it was. The script, the pivot to make me the problem. I didn't argue. I didn't debate. Debate is what liars want. Debate turns facts into feelings and feelings into fog. I gave her none of it. I smiled, just a little, and it wasn't warmth. It was the expression you make when someone tries to sell you a fake watch while you're wearing a real one. Then I did something that made her angry in a new way. I stepped back, not away from her, away from the argument. I reached for a glass of water, took a sip, and let her words hit the wall and fall to the floor. Calm is a weapon when someone is trying to control you with emotion. She kept talking. She kept demanding. She kept pushing. And the more she pushed, the clearer it became that this wasn't a wife begging for intimacy. This was a person furious that her leverage had stopped working. I walked out of the kitchen and into the bedroom without slamming anything. I opened the drawer where I kept spare paper and a pen, and I wrote down the date, the time, and what happened. Not her exact words, the shape of it, her demand, my mention of Mike, her physical reaction, her immediate pivot to calling me unstable. Then I signed the page and placed it in a folder. Tessa followed me, still talking, still trying to pull me back into the scene where she was the lead. She asked what I was doing, she demanded to see the folder, she accused me of collecting evidence like I was a lawyer. She tried to grab it. I stepped sideways, not touching her, just refusing her access. Her hand froze midair. That pause told me everything, too. She wasn't scared of being wrong. She was scared of paper. That night, after she fell asleep in the living room with the TV on, I sat at the desk again and opened our shared account history. I looked at the hotel bar tab. I looked at the dates she claimed she was working late. I looked at the small expenses that showed up in clusters. Parking, late-night coffee, a midweek quick meal near the river condos. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just the truth bleeding through the cracks in her routine. Then I did the thing people think is cold until they need it. I made a simple table on one page. Date, her story, time she left, time she returned, zone shown on the weekly summary, charges on the shared card. I kept it clean and short because short is what survives scrutiny. When I finished, I sat back and stared at the page, waiting for the part where I would break down or rage or do something cinematic. Instead, I felt steady. Because once you have a pattern, you don't have a mystery anymore. You have a decision. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to threaten. I wasn't going to scream for love from someone who treated loyalty like a tool. I was going to do what I do at work when a driver tries to game the system and thinks nobody will notice. I was going to keep the record. I was going to build the timeline. I was going to use small truths the way she used small lies. The next morning, she acted sweet, like the night before hadn't happened. She made coffee. She touched my arm lightly. She asked if I wanted breakfast. Her voice had softness in it that looked like care until you watched her eyes. Her eyes were searching, checking whether I'd calmed down, checking whether I'd forgotten. I nodded, took the coffee, and thanked her. I played my part too, not because I wanted to trick her for fun, but because I needed her to keep believing she still controlled the room. She talked about work again. She mentioned Mike casually, almost as a test. She said he'd been stressed lately. She said he was dealing with vendor complaints and contract issues. She said procurement was a mess. She said she felt bad for him. I listened and said very little. But inside my head, the table on that page gained a new column. Mike, procurement, vendors. Access has a shape, so does money. And in that moment, I realized the story might be bigger than an affair. Mike wasn't just the name she feared. He was a doorway into a system where favors turn into invoices, and invoices turn into leverage. Tessa left for her shift with a kiss that felt like a performance. The door closed behind her, and the apartment went quiet in the way it only goes quiet when someone is living two lives. I sat at the desk, opened my folder, and added one more line to the ledger. Her mask is slipping. Mike is the center. Next step is proof that survives daylight. And as I wrote it, my phone buzzed with a bank alert on the shared card, a fresh charge tagged near the river condos. Same zone, same day, same routine. Different lie. By lunch, the charge had settled in our shared account history like a fresh bruise. Same neighborhood cluster, same kind of vendor. Same timing window she loved because it sounded plausible. Tessa had learned to wrap her lies in routine the way a thief wraps stolen glass in newspaper. Quiet, careful, still stolen. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I didn't do anything that would give her the thrill of seeing me react. If you work dispatch long enough, you learn something that applies to marriages too. The person who panics first loses control of the board. Instead, I did what I always do when a driver disputes a fare and claims the system is wrong. I pulled the available records I was allowed to see, and I lined them up until the story either held or broke. No heroics, no stalking, no grand confrontation, just the slow grind of facts rubbing against each other until the fake paint came off. At home, I had her weekly driver summary printout from the fridge, the one she once waved at me like proof of hustle. I had our bank alerts, the kind that pop up because the account is mine too. I had my own handwritten notes of her alibis, dated and signed because paper doesn't forget when you want it to. I also had something else, something I hadn't needed yet but now felt important. A screenshot of that HR-style shift message she'd shown me 2 months back, proud that Mike made it happen for her, the kind of scheduling favor that sounds innocent until you notice it always lands on the same nights. She had flashed it at me like a trophy. I had saved it like a warning. I added the new charge to the table on my desk and felt the pattern tighten. Not a single proof, not a smoking gun. A braid, dates, zones, money, excuses. A braid is stronger than any single strand, and it hurts more when you pull it tight. Then I went to work. The operations center is a place that smells like burnt coffee and plastic heat from monitors. It's all noise, all urgency, all people talking over each other because they believe volume equals control. I've always liked it because the truth lives underneath the noise. The truth is in timestamps and cues and patterns that don't care who is yelling. I took my seat and logged in, and the first thing I saw was a driver shortage alert on my screen. Typical. A weather change 2 states away, a concert downtown, a ripple of demand. The system doesn't judge. It just counts. Human beings are the ones who call it unfair. I did my job for 2 hours, because the job pays the bills, and the bills don't care what your wife is doing. Then, during a quiet stretch, I walked to Jade's desk. Jade Mercer looks like someone who learned early to keep her face neutral. She is smart enough to survive in a room full of ego without getting eaten. She also notices things, which is why I chose her. People who notice things always think they are alone until you ask them the right question. I didn't ask about Tessa. I didn't ask about Mike. I asked about schedules. I said I'd noticed certain drivers getting consistent prime windows, the kind that should rotate but don't. I asked if there was a glitch in the bidding system. I asked it like an operations question, because operations questions are safe. Jade looked at me for half a second too long, then glanced at her screen as if the answer might be visible there. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She said it was complicated. She said sometimes procurement partnerships influence incentives, and incentives influence schedules. She said she wasn't supposed to talk about it like it was gossip. Procurement. There it was again, a word that kept walking into my life wearing different clothes. I asked one follow-up, calm and simple. I asked whether Mike Harlan had any say in incentives. Jade's eyes flicked to mine, then away. Her throat moved as she swallowed. Not fear of me, fear of being seen. She said Mike had influence. She said he wasn't on the dispatch side, but he had a way of making certain numbers look important to leadership. She said the company had vendor relationships tied to driver supply programs, and procurement touched all of it. She didn't have to say more. She didn't need to. She had given me what I wanted. Confirmation that Mike wasn't just a manager who gave my wife pep talks. He was a man who controlled levers that moved money, levers that could move my wife. I thanked Jade and walked away like we'd discussed weather. That's the trick. You don't leave a scorch mark behind you. You just keep moving. Back at my desk, I opened a blank document and wrote a new column for my private table. Company incentives, vendor programs, procurement touchpoints. The affair wasn't separate from the money anymore. It was wrapped around it like a vine. At 3, my phone buzzed with a new bank notification. Another small charge. Same area, a quick meal. I didn't even feel anger. I felt confirmation. She was moving through her routine with the confidence of someone who thinks the world is blind. She wasn't wrong. Most of it is. That evening, I came home at my usual time. Tessa wasn't there yet. The apartment felt too clean, too staged, like she'd started prepping it for a life without me and was practicing how it would look. I set my keys down, washed my hands, and opened the shared account app again. I did not scroll for hours. I didn't need to. I filtered by merchant category and date range, and I saw the clusters the way I see surge patterns on my work maps. The small charges weren't random. They were anchors. Coffee, parking, a quick meal. Then later, a bigger charge every couple of weeks that looked like a hotel or a travel booking. Not every lie is expensive, but the expensive ones always leave marks. I printed a month of statements and laid them on the table, 1 page per week. Then I took a marker and circled only the charges that aligned with the condo zone nights. I didn't circle everything. That's how you end up with a messy page nobody trusts. I circled the minimum set that created a story. Then I stapled the pages in chronological order and labeled the packet with the date range. Simple, clean, boring. Boring is what survives a room full of professionals. When Tessa finally came in, she carried her purse like it weighed more than usual. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, but not from cold air. Her eyes were bright in a way I'd learned to distrust. She kissed me on the cheek and asked how my day was, voice light, as if we were fine. I told her it was busy. True enough. I asked how her shift was. She said it was exhausting. She said she'd had a weird passenger. She said Mike was dealing with contract headaches and everyone was tense. She slid Mike into the conversation like she was normalizing him, like repetition could turn poison into water. I nodded and kept my face blank. She went to the bathroom, and I watched her through the hallway mirror as she checked her phone before she even shut the door. That wasn't love. That was a habit. I didn't need to see the screen to understand the priority. After she showered, she put on her soft clothes and sat near me on the couch, leaning in the way she used to when she wanted closeness. I felt my body stiffen without permission. She noticed because she was always watching for the smallest sign of control slipping. She asked if I was still upset from the kitchen fight. She asked if I was going to punish her by withholding affection. She asked if I was going to keep acting like she disgusted me. There it was again. The emotional trap baited with shame. If I denied it, she'd accuse me of lying. If I admitted it, she'd play victim. Either way, she'd steer the conversation away from Mike. I didn't step into it. I told her I was tired. I told her we could talk later. I told her I had a lot on my mind. All true, all vague, all useless to her need for control. She didn't like vague. Vague meant she couldn't fight it properly. She pressed closer, fingers on my arm, voice soft. She asked if I wanted her, as if desire was a checkbox she could tick to feel safe. My stomach tightened, and I thought of the doorway I hadn't seen, the condo I hadn't visited, the small charges that lined up like footprints. I thought of the way her face drained when I said Mike's name. I thought of her confidence, her certainty that I'd never connect the dots. I pulled my arm away gently, as if I was avoiding an awkward touch from a stranger. Not dramatic, not harsh, just final. Her eyes sharpened. She asked what my problem was again, louder this time. She asked if there was someone else. She asked if I was cheating and projecting. Classic. When they can't defend their actions, they accuse you of theirs. It's a cheap move, but it works on people who still crave approval. I smiled a little, because the question was almost funny. Someone else. As if I had time to build a second life. As if I had any interest in a new person when the person I lived with had become a liability. I told her no, there wasn't someone else. I told her the only person in this house who kept secrets was her. Indirect, clean, no names. She snapped that she had no secrets. She said she worked hard. She said I was paranoid. She said I didn't trust her. She said she couldn't live like this. I let her talk until her voice ran out. Then I asked one question. Not about love, not about desire. About time. I asked where she was tonight, between 8 and 10, and why the shared card showed a charge near the river condos. Her face did that thing again, that tiny delay before the lie arrives. A half beat where her mind flips through options like a deck of cards. She said she had been driving. She said she must have picked up food there. She said the app routes drivers everywhere. She said I shouldn't be checking charges like some kind of investigator. She tried to make the act of noticing the crime feel worse than the crime itself. I nodded and acted like I accepted it. Then I asked a second question, quieter, sharper. I asked why the same area shows up on her summaries again and again on the nights she works late, and why the charges cluster around those same nights. Her throat moved. Her eyes darted to the hallway, as if the walls might rescue her. Then she got angry, because anger is what she used when fear didn't work. She said I was tracking her. She said I was disgusting. She said I was controlling. She said she couldn't breathe with me watching her every move. Watching. I almost laughed. She'd been watched by cameras and screens in my world, by systems that log every movement. That was her job. She just hated being watched by someone who could connect what he saw. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I stood up, walked to the desk, and opened the folder with my single-signed page from the kitchen fight. I didn't show it to her. I didn't need to. I just let her see that it existed. She froze. Her anger faltered. The mask slipped for a second. Then she tried to recover by lunging into a new story, something about privacy, something about my job making me obsessive, something about her needing space. And space. She always wanted space. Space is where secrets grow. I closed the folder and slid it back into the drawer, slow and deliberate, like I was putting a weapon away. Her eyes followed it, and I understood what scared her. Not me, not my body, not my voice. The fact that I was creating a record she couldn't talk her way out of. I told her we were done arguing for tonight. I told her she could sleep on the couch if she wanted. I told her I was going to bed. She stared at me like she expected me to apologize, like she expected me to chase her tears, like she expected me to beg for forgiveness for noticing her routine. When I didn't, she turned cold. She told me she needed a break. She told me she might go stay with a friend for a few days. She told me she couldn't be with someone who didn't trust her. I nodded and said that was her choice. That answer hit her harder than any insult. Choice. She wanted to feel like she was the one leaving, the one in control, the one writing the ending. She didn't like being reminded she had to own what she did. She grabbed her phone, stood up, and went to the balcony for a breath. I watched through the glass as she typed fast, shoulders tense. I didn't need to see who she texted. I knew who lived in the center of her fear. When she came back inside, her voice was calmer in a way that felt rehearsed. She said she had a meeting tomorrow with Mike about scheduling. She said he'd help her sort out the tension. She said we could talk after. There it was. The same pattern. When pressure rises at home, she runs to him. When she feels exposed, she seeks the person who promised her safety. I went to bed and lay in the dark, listening to her move around the living room. The TV volume stayed low. Her phone buzzed once, then twice, then went quiet. I stared at the ceiling and thought about Jade's words. Procurement touchpoints, vendor relationships, incentives that move numbers. And I thought about the way the competitor in my life wouldn't be a random guy. It would be a man who could offer her something I couldn't, a promotion, a clean story, a new identity. In the morning, after she left, I did not follow her. I did not chase. I did not do anything illegal or dramatic. I went to my desk, opened my table, and updated it with last night's questions and her responses. I photographed the newest printed statement pages beside today's newspaper, because dates matter. Then I saved a screenshot of the shared calendar week view, because her meeting claim was now part of the timeline. I stapled the pages, placed them into a sleeve, and labeled it with the date. My wife believed this was still a fight about desire. I knew it was a fight about control, and control, in the end, always leaves a paper trail. By the third week, the city felt smaller than it used to. Not because I followed her, and not because I ran around playing detective. It felt smaller because her routine kept circling the same few blocks, the same few hours, the same excuses, and routine always compresses the world. I went into the ops center that Monday with a new rule for myself. I would not hunt for surprises. I would build a file that could survive in daylight. In my line of work, panic gets people hurt and paperwork gets people paid. I had no interest in getting hurt, and I had even less interest in paying for her lies twice. The first thing I did was work. I cleared the queue, fixed a surge imbalance, handled 2 driver disputes, and coached a new dispatcher through a passenger complaint without raising my voice. Normal life, the kind people cling to when their personal life is falling apart. The more unstable my home became, the more stable I made my posture in public. It was not denial, it was strategy. If Tessa ever tried to paint me as unstable, I wanted an entire workplace full of people who had only ever seen me calm. Around noon, Jade slid into the chair beside my station like she had something to say but didn't want her screen to witness it. She didn't make it dramatic. She didn't lean in like a spy. She just asked if I could cover her for a minute while she took a call. I covered her. When she returned, she didn't thank me right away. She sat down, adjusted her headset, stared at her dashboard, then said something quiet that landed heavy. She said procurement had asked for a report on driver incentive payouts tied to vendor programs. She said it was unusual. She said it meant someone higher up had gotten nervous. I kept my face blank and asked one safe question. I asked whether Mike's name was on the request. Jade didn't answer directly. She didn't need to. She just nodded once, small and sharp, then pretended to type as if nothing had happened. That was the moment my mind stopped treating Mike as a secret lover and started treating him as a pressure point, a man who needed control, a man who used people the way the system uses numbers. Tessa wasn't just sleeping with him, she was orbiting power. I went home that night with the same calm I'd worn all day. Calm as a costume, and I was getting good at it. Tessa was already there, sitting at the kitchen island with her phone in her hand and her legs crossed like she was waiting for someone to arrive. She looked put together, not comfortable. The house smelled like she'd tried to make dinner but gave up halfway. A pan on the stove with nothing inside, a half-cut lemon on the counter, performance without follow-through. She asked about my day. I answered with 2 sentences and asked about hers. She said she was exhausted. She said she had a meeting later this week with Mike about opportunities. She said the company was changing things and she wanted to be positioned right. Positioned. That word had become her religion. I nodded and washed my hands slowly, letting her fill the silence with whatever story she needed. She talked about procurement like she knew what it meant, like she belonged near it. She talked about vendors and contracts and how important Mike was. She didn't say she was proud of him. She said he was useful. Then she changed gears and asked casually why I'd been looking at the shared account so often lately. She didn't accuse, she tested. She was checking whether my spine had softened. I told her the truth in the smallest possible shape. I said I was reviewing expenses. I said things felt tight lately. I said I wanted to make sure we were on track. She smiled like she believed me, but her eyes didn't. Her eyes were sharp, measuring. She asked if I didn't trust her. I didn't answer the question. I asked a different one. I asked if she'd use the shared card tonight near the river condos again. There was that half-beat delay, the tiny hitch before the lie arrives. Then she said the app takes her everywhere. She said she can't control where passengers request rides. She said I was obsessing. I let her talk, then I asked one more question, gentle and direct. I asked why her late shift nights always cluster in the same zone, and why the charges on our card follow the same pattern. She stood up quickly, chair scraping the floor, and her body language tried to turn the room into a courtroom where she was the judge. She said she couldn't live under suspicion. She said she felt watched. She said she felt violated. Violated. Another favorite word of hers. She used it like perfume, a strong scent meant to overpower the actual air. I didn't react. I didn't apologize. I told her I was not accusing her of anything tonight. I told her I was documenting household finances. I told her if she wanted separate finances, we could do that through proper channels. The phrase proper channels made her flinch. She hated anything that removed her ability to improvise. She changed tactics and moved closer, voice softer, face almost pleading. She said we needed to reconnect. She said she missed me. She said she wanted me to want her again. It would have been easy, in some alternate life, to believe that. To take her hand and pretend this was just stress. But my body didn't believe her. My body remembered the pale fear when I said Mike's name. My body remembered the way she fought for control, not closeness. I told her I needed space tonight. I told her we could talk after I slept. I walked to the bedroom without slamming a door. She followed me anyway, and that was when she made her second mistake. She said Mike told her my behavior was classic projection. She said Mike said men who accuse are usually guilty. She said Mike thought I might be hiding something. Hearing my wife cite her boss's opinion about my character felt like stepping on glass. Not because it hurt, because it confirmed the relationship was deeper than she admitted. She wasn't just sleeping with him, she was letting him script her worldview. I turned and looked at her calmly. I told her Mike didn't get to diagnose our marriage. I told her if she wanted to bring other people into our life, then our life would become a matter of record. That word again, record. Her throat moved. Her eyes flicked to my desk drawer like she could see paper hiding inside it. Then she snapped back into anger and told me I was threatening her. She told me I was scary when I talked like that. Scary. Another word designed to poison rooms in advance. I didn't argue. I went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and let her stand there with her own tension. Eventually she left, stomping like a teenager. I waited until I heard the living room TV click on, then I went to my desk and updated the ledger. I wrote down her new claim that Mike was advising her about me. I wrote down the date, the time, the shift in her tone. I signed the page and slid it into the folder. Then I did the thing I'd been resisting because it felt like crossing a line, even though it wasn't illegal and it wasn't invasive. I opened the rideshare account under my name. Tessa sometimes used my login on our home tablet when she wanted to review weekly numbers on a bigger screen. She didn't have a separate household tablet. She had our tablet, shared device, shared access, the kind of shared life she loved until it started reflecting her back. The account history showed trip summaries and general drop zones. It didn't show private messages. It didn't show anything sensational. It showed what any account holder is allowed to see. I filtered by date range and looked for the repeated pattern nights. The same zone kept showing, a few cross streets, a few pickup points, one recurring destination cluster that aligned with the river condo area. I took a screenshot of the trip list showing dates and general location markers. No personal passenger details, nothing that would be invasive beyond what the account already displayed. I printed that screenshot and signed the back. Then I labeled it Route Pattern Summary and slipped it into a sleeve. If she ever tried to claim the charges were random, I now had a simple document showing the repeated location rhythm. Not proof of an affair by itself, but one leg of the table that would not collapse. The next day, I used lunch to tighten the money side without turning it into a conspiracy. I didn't go hunting for offshore accounts. I didn't pretend I could see corporate fraud from my kitchen. I stayed in my lane. I reviewed our shared cards merchant list and pulled the charge details where they existed. One hotel charge included an email receipt that had been sent to the shared inbox we used for household bills. I hadn't thought about that inbox in months. Tessa knew it existed. She knew I had access. She still let it happen, which told me she thought I never checked it. The receipt was boring, which made it powerful. Date, time, merchant, total, no room number, no personal details. Just enough to prove the charge wasn't groceries, wasn't gas, and wasn't a random detour. I saved the email header showing the receipt date and sender. I printed it and signed the back. Then I added it to the sleeve stack. That night, Jade texted me one line that made my pulse steady instead of fast. She said HR compliance was scheduling short meetings this week about incentive anomalies. She said my name was not on the list, but Mike's name was being whispered around it. I did not ask for more. I didn't want Jade to become my accomplice. I wanted her to stay what she already was, a person who noticed and could confirm one clean fact if asked. I replied with one sentence. I told her to keep her own screenshots, dated, and do nothing else unless HR asked. Then I put my phone down and listened to the apartment. Tessa came home late again, this time with a forced brightness that didn't reach her eyes. She told me she had a meeting after her shift. She told me it was about career growth. She told me Mike was pushing for her. She said it like a romance, like she wanted me to feel jealous and chase, like she wanted to watch me beg. I nodded and asked a single practical question. I asked where the meeting was. She said downtown. She said a hotel lobby. She said it was casual and professional. Hotel lobby. The words landed on top of the receipt in my sleeve like two pieces of the same puzzle clicking together. I didn't accuse her. I didn't even correct her. I just asked if she could forward the receipt if the meeting expense had been reimbursed. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second. She asked what receipt. She asked why I would need it. She asked if I was trying to embarrass her. I told her reimbursement receipts are normal for household budgeting. I told her if she was climbing, I wanted to support her with clean records. I told her I didn't want any surprises. Surprises. That word hit her like a slap, because surprises were her favorite hiding place. She turned away, muttering, and went to the bathroom with her phone. I watched her reflection in the hallway mirror again, the way she held the device like a lifeline. She was not thinking about me. She was thinking about how to control what I could see. When she returned, she didn't mention receipts. She didn't mention Mike. She climbed into bed and faced away from me like a punishment. I lay there in the dark, breathing slowly, and I understood something that made my mouth go dry. She wasn't going to stop. Not because she couldn't, because she didn't think she had to. She believed the world would always bend around her stories, and she believed any man who questioned her could be labeled and dismissed. If I wanted the truth to matter, I needed it to enter a room that keeps minutes. And I was starting to see that room forming on the horizon. Not in my house, but in her workplace. The next morning, as she left, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter for half a second before she snatched it up. I didn't see the message. I didn't touch the phone. But I saw one thing on the screen. A calendar reminder title that flashed as she locked it. All Hands Town Hall. She froze for a beat, then shoved the phone into her bag and walked out without looking at me. I stood alone in the quiet kitchen, staring at the door she'd just closed, and felt the story shift again. Because if there was a town hall coming, there would be a stage. And if there was a stage, there would be a record. I opened my drawer, pulled out my folder, and added one new line to the ledger. Town hall is coming. Mike's world will need witnesses. So will mine. The town hall reminder stayed in my head like a low alarm. Not loud, not urgent, just constant. The kind you cannot ignore once you know what it means. At work, town halls were not for truth. They were for mood. Leadership used them to calm people down, hype people up, or distract them from whatever mess was spreading under the floorboards. If procurement was suddenly requesting incentive anomaly reports, a town hall meant someone wanted the room smiling before the numbers hit. That morning, I kept my routine tight. Coffee, shower, keys. No staring at Tessa as she moved around the apartment like a guest in her own home. She was in a hurry, dressed better than a normal driving shift required, hair too neat, perfume too deliberate. She said she had an early start and a long day. She kissed my cheek like she was stamping a receipt, then left. I waited until the door clicked shut before I opened my desk drawer. My folder had become a quiet second life, not a secret life, a documented one. Every page dated, every page signed, every screenshot printed clean. I kept it boring on purpose. People trust boring. People distrust rage. I added one new entry at the top of the ledger. Town hall announced, procurement report requested, wife referencing Mike's influence more openly. That was it. No guesses, no drama, just what I could defend. On my lunch break, I did something I'd avoided because it felt too final. I logged into the shared household email inbox we used for bills and appointment reminders. It was a dull place filled with payment confirmations and spam. It was also the place Tessa had started using as a trash can because she assumed I never looked. I searched for hotel receipts using the simplest words: hotel, confirmation, receipt, invoice. I found 2 messages in under a minute. They were not romantic. They did not mention names beyond a billing header. They were dull confirmations with dates and amounts, not the kind of thing a clerk sends without thinking, but the dates landed on top of her alibis like stones. 2 nights she claimed late driving shifts. 2 nights our shared card paid for a lobby bar tab and a late add-on fee that made no sense for one person. I printed the email headers only: sender, date, subject, total, nothing else. I signed the back of each printout, added the date, and slid them into a clear sleeve labeled receipts. Then I stopped. No spiraling, no doom scrolling. If the truth is real, it stays real without you staring at it. Back in the ops center, Jade was already tense. You can tell when someone is carrying a secret because they move like they're balancing a tray that could spill. She kept glancing at her dashboard, then at the internal calendar, then back again. When I passed her station, she caught my eye and gave the smallest nod toward an empty conference room. I followed her there after my shift ended. Jade didn't say Tessa's name. She didn't say Mike's name. She talked in systems terms, because systems terms keep people safe. She said HR compliance had flagged unusual incentive patterns tied to a vendor program that procurement owned. She said the review was moving fast because a vendor had filed a complaint about being pressured into add-ons that didn't match the contract. Complaint. The word landed heavy. In dispatch, a complaint can be a mosquito or a bullet, depending on who it reaches. Vendors don't complain unless they think someone higher up will listen, or unless they're trying to protect themselves before a bigger story breaks. I asked one question, careful. I asked whether Mike was scheduled to speak at the town hall. Jade hesitated, then nodded again. She said procurement leadership would be on stage with operations leadership. She said Mike had been insisting on a section about integrity and partnerships, which sounded like a man trying to spray cologne over smoke. She added one more detail, and her voice lowered, as if the walls might learn to read. She said there was talk of an internal review ID being assigned. She said HR had begun pulling basic records tied to reimbursements. Reimbursements? That was my lane. That was household level. That was the thread I could hold without needing favors or illegal access. I thanked Jade and walked out of the conference room like we'd discussed scheduling. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Every red light gave my brain time to imagine what Tessa would do when she sensed the walls closing in. She would not confess, she would not apologize. She would build a story where I was the threat. She had already started. Scary, controlling, paranoid. Words designed to travel faster than receipts. When I got home, I found her suitcase by the couch. Not a big suitcase. A small weekender bag. The kind people use when they want to pretend it's normal. It was zipped, clean, and positioned where I could not miss it. A message without words. Tessa came out of the bedroom with her phone in hand and said she had to go to a training event overnight. She said it was required. She said it was good for her career. She said she would be back tomorrow. I looked at the bag, then at her, and felt my body go cold in that practical way it does when you realize someone is about to take your life and rearrange it. I didn't argue. I didn't ask what hotel. I didn't ask who else was attending. Those questions invite rehearsed answers. Instead, I asked if the training had an email confirmation so I could update the household calendar. Her eyes flicked. Another micro delay. Then she said she'd send it later. She said she was in a rush. She said I was making a big deal out of nothing. I nodded, like it was fine. Then I did the one thing that never fails to expose a lie. I made it small. I asked what time she needed to leave. She said in 10 minutes. I asked how she was getting there. She said she would drive. I asked which part of town. She said downtown, near the corporate offices. Downtown, hotel receipts, vendor complaints, town hall stage. It all started lining up into something that felt less like heartbreak and more like an operation. She grabbed the bag and moved toward the door with brisk confidence, like she expected me to follow and plead. When I didn't, she slowed, as if confused. She turned and tried again with the old pressure. She asked if I even cared. She asked if I wanted her gone. She asked if I was happy to have the apartment to myself. I kept my face neutral and told her I cared about the kids' routine and the household budget. I told her to send the confirmation when she could. I told her to drive safe. Her expression tightened. She wanted anger. She wanted tears. She wanted something she could point at later as proof I was unstable. I gave her none. She left. I waited a full minute after the door shut, then I moved. Not to chase, to record. I opened the shared account app and turned on notifications I already had a right to control. The account is mine. The alerts go to my phone. That was not spying. That was household survival. Then I opened the shared calendar and added a neutral placeholder entry. Wife overnight training, pending details. That way, if she later claimed she told me and I forgot, the record would show I asked. Then I sat at my desk and wrote one more signed line. Overnight trip announced with no confirmation. Bag packed, destination vague. Emotional bait used to provoke reaction. That line mattered more than the bag. Half an hour later, a merchant alert hit my phone. A parking garage charge near the river condo zone. Not downtown corporate. The amount was small. The implication was not. My first instinct was to feel the sting. The second instinct, stronger, was to feel the relief of confirmation. Relief is ugly, but it's honest. It meant I wasn't crazy. It meant my calm wasn't wasted. I saved the alert screenshot, printed it, and signed the back. Then I did something else, something I could defend without shame. I opened the rideshare account trip summary and filtered to the last hour. There it was, a chain of trip entries. Not names, not private passenger data. Just timestamps and general pickup and drop-off zones tied to the account. Her last completed route ended in that same river condo cluster. I saved a screenshot of the list view with the time visible. Printed, signed, sleeved, labeled. My hands didn't shake. They moved like they were doing a job. Because they were. An hour later, a second alert arrived. A quick meal charge from a place near the same zone. Then nothing. No downtown, no corporate center, no training site. Just the same routine wearing a new mask. The silence that followed felt louder than the alerts. I paced the apartment once, then stopped and forced myself to sit. If I kept moving, I would drift into emotion. Emotion is where you start making mistakes, and mistakes are what people like Tessa feed on. So I opened a new page and began the one-page timeline I knew HR would want if things escalated. Not a novel, not a rant, a table, date, claimed reason, route zone, related charge, supporting screenshot. In my head, I could hear a compliance facilitator's voice asking for proof without pity. I built the page for that voice. While I worked, I noticed something else on the kitchen counter. A folded paper, half tucked beneath a grocery flyer. At first, it looked like nothing, like junk. Then I saw the header and my stomach tightened again. It was an internal company reimbursement form. Not filled out completely, just a template printout with a few boxes penciled in. Employee name, date, expense type, vendor name. There were 2 initials in the vendor field. M.H. Mike Harlan. I did not touch it with excitement. I touched it with gloves in my mind because this was not romance proof. This was money proof. And money proof changes what rooms you can enter. I photographed the form where it sat, with the date visible on my phone screen in the frame. Then I placed it into a clear sleeve and labeled it Found Form. Now I had something that connected Tessa to reimbursements in a way she couldn't dismiss as random driving. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a message from her. She said she was tired. She said the training ran late. She said she would call tomorrow. She added a heart emoji like a bandage. I did not reply. Instead, I compared the timestamp on her message to the timestamp on the parking garage charge and the trip list screenshot. The timeline didn't need to be perfect. It needed to be consistent. It was. I went to bed alone and slept in fragments, waking up to check the time and feeling that low alarm again. By morning, 2 things happened close together. First, my work calendar pinged with an invite from HR compliance. Short meeting, 30 minutes, attendance required, no agenda. Second, Tessa walked in quietly with her weekender bag, hair slightly messy, eyes cautious. She looked at me like she expected to see anger and found only quiet. She said she'd had a long night. She said the training was stressful. She said she didn't want to fight today. I nodded once and asked for the confirmation email. Her face tightened. She said she didn't have it yet. I didn't challenge her. I didn't need to. I opened my desk drawer, took out the sleeve with the parking garage charge, and placed it on the table without a word. Then I placed the route list screenshot beside it. Then the reimbursement form photo. She stared at the sleeves like they were live animals. I still didn't say her name. I didn't say Mike's name. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her calmly and waited for her to choose a story. And for the first time since this started, she didn't know which one would survive. Tessa stared at the sleeves like they were radioactive, and the funny part was how little paper it took to scare her. For months, she'd treated me like a man who could be steered with tone and tears. Now she was staring at 3 boring exhibits and realizing tone doesn't erase timestamps. Her eyes moved from the parking garage charge to the route list to the reimbursement form, then back to my face, searching for anger. She wanted heat because heat is something she knew how to manage. Heat gives her a reason to call me unstable. Heat turns a clean timeline into a messy argument. I gave her none. She tried the soft approach first. Her shoulders dropped a little, her voice lowered. She framed herself as exhausted, overwhelmed, cornered by work demands and my suspicion. She implied the receipts were misunderstandings. She implied the zone was random. She implied the initials were nothing. Then she tested a harder line. She asked why I was collecting things. She pushed the word like a knife, as if collecting was worse than what the things proved. She tried to make the act of noticing feel immoral. I leaned back in my chair and let her talk until she ran out. That was the trick I'd learned in crisis rooms. People reveal more when they think they are still controlling the pace. When she stopped, I asked one question, calm and narrow. I asked her to tell me, in one sentence, what the overnight trip was and who signed off on it. She blinked twice. Her eyes drifted up and to the side, the direction her mind went when she needed to invent. She claimed it was a driver training. She claimed it was required. She claimed Mike had arranged it because she was being fast-tracked. Fast-tracked. That was the word she used when she wanted me to feel small. I nodded once and slid the reimbursement form a few inches closer to her, not aggressively, just enough that the initials sat directly between us like a third person. Then I asked my second question, still narrow. I asked why Mike's initials were on a reimbursement form sitting in our kitchen. Her throat moved. She started to laugh and failed halfway through. The laugh turned into irritation. She said she grabbed the wrong paper at work. She said she needed to fill it out later. She said it meant nothing. She said everyone uses templates. I didn't challenge the explanation. I just wrote it down in my mind as her first official story on record. Wrong paper, work template, no meaning. Then I asked something even smaller, and small questions are the ones liars hate most. I asked why she didn't throw the paper away if it meant nothing. She didn't answer right away. That delay was the loudest part. She pivoted into anger. She accused me of controlling her finances. She accused me of monitoring her movements. She accused me of trying to trap her. She said I was punishing her because I couldn't handle her ambition. Ambition. That was another costume word, something she wore to make selfishness look noble. I stayed seated. I kept my voice even. I told her I wasn't trapping her. I told her I was protecting the household from risk. I told her if her work was clean, then records would support her, and this would end. Records. The word hit her again. She hated records because records don't respond to charm. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at it and tried to hide the glance, which was almost adorable. She was still performing in front of me as if I was an audience, not a witness. I asked her one final question for the morning, not about Mike, not about sex, not about love. I asked whether she would agree to separate finances until things were clarified. She froze. Separating finances was the first real consequence she couldn't talk around. It wasn't emotional, it was structural. She said no. She said I couldn't do that without her. She said it was marital property. She said I was threatening her security. Security. She meant access, she meant control. I nodded and told her that was fine, because then the next step would be done through proper channels. I didn't say which channels, I didn't need to. The phrase itself made her swallow hard. Then I picked up the sleeves and slid them back into my folder. That movement changed something in the room. When I removed the evidence from the table, she lost the fight she was trying to force. She wanted me to keep them out so she could wrestle them. She wanted a scene. She wanted to be able to say later that I waved papers in her face and threatened her. I gave her the opposite. I put the proof away like it was nothing, like it was already handled, and that quiet made her panic more than any shout could. I stood up and told her I had an HR meeting at work. I told her we would talk later. Then I walked past her and took my coffee to the sink as if the morning was normal. She followed me into the kitchen like a shadow. She tried to make her voice softer again. She tried to ask what the HR meeting was about. She tried to sound casual, but her words came out too fast. I kept my answer boring. I told her it was routine. I told her compliance was meeting with several people. Both were true in a broad way, and broad truth is useful. It gives you cover while still being honest enough to stand on. Her jaw tightened. She said she didn't like being left out of my life. The line would have landed better if she hadn't been living a second one. I left the apartment with my folder in my bag and my face neutral. In the elevator, I caught my reflection and saw the thing I'd been trying not to become. A man who looked like he'd already accepted an ending. Not sad, not angry, just finished. At the Ops Center, the HR meeting invite sat on my calendar like a loaded gun. 30 minutes, no agenda. Those are never nothing. I didn't rush to it. I did my work first. I handled a surge. I solved a driver dispute. I took a call from a field supervisor who wanted to yell at someone and chose me. I let him exhaust himself and then gave him the solution in 3 calm sentences. When people see you calm under pressure, they hesitate to believe you're unstable later. I was building that wall brick by brick. 5 minutes before the meeting, Jade walked by my station and didn't stop. She only let her eyes meet mine for a half second, long enough to say she'd heard about it and she was paying attention. Then she kept walking. That was all I needed from her. Not loyalty, not heroics, just awareness. The HR compliance office was on the quieter side of the building, away from the adrenaline of operations. The air smelled like copier toner and stale mint gum. People speak softer there, not because they're kind, but because they understand that sound carries. Rena Vale met me at the door and greeted me like a formality. She didn't ask how I was. She asked me to confirm my name and department, then guided me into a small room with a table and a closed laptop. 2 other people were there. An HR note-taker with a blank expression and an operations manager who looked uncomfortable, like he'd been pulled into a story he didn't want to star in. Rena said the meeting was about incentive anomalies tied to a procurement vendor program. She said they were gathering facts. She said they were speaking to several employees who had access to scheduling views and reimbursement workflows. She said my name had come up because of my role and my reputation for process. Reputation, I almost smiled. My wife had been trying to poison mine at home while HR was complimenting it at work. Rena asked if I had noticed anything unusual with driver scheduling related to certain vendors. I answered the question cleanly. I said I had observed recurring patterns that did not match normal rotation. I said I had not altered anything personally. I said I had discussed system behavior with colleagues in the normal course of operations. Then Rena asked the question that mattered, but she asked it like a professional. She asked whether I had any documentation that could help them verify a pattern without relying on rumor. This was the moment where most people get excited and ruin the room. They start talking too fast. They start accusing names. They start acting like the hero. I took my folder out calmly and placed 1 page on the table. Not the whole story, not the whole stack. 1 page. A simple table I'd built at home, dates, general route zones visible from the account summary, and matching household charges tied to those nights. No personal passenger details, no private messages, no illegal access, just the household-level proof that the same nights lined up in the same way. Rena looked at the page and didn't react outwardly, which told me she'd seen worse. The note-taker started typing immediately, which told me the room had shifted from conversation to record. Rena asked how I obtained the data. I explained simply. Shared account statements. shared household email receipts, a driver summary screen shown voluntarily in the past, bank alerts on an account I own, nothing more. The operations manager asked if this was a marital dispute. His tone carried the warning I expected. Nobody wants HR to become a therapist. I kept my voice even and said it wasn't about my marriage. I said it was about reimbursements and vendor patterns that appeared inconsistent with policy. I said I was providing documentation for HR to review, not asking HR to solve my home life. That framing mattered. It kept the room clean. Rena asked whether I could connect the pattern to a person on the procurement side. She did not say Mike's name. She let me choose whether to say it. I didn't say it immediately. I said I had observed my wife referencing procurement leadership repeatedly in relation to her schedule and opportunities. I said I had found a reimbursement form template in our home that contained initials corresponding to procurement leadership. Then I slid the photo of that form across the table. Rena read it carefully. She asked where the form came from. I said it was left at home. I said I photographed it where it was found and placed it in a sleeve. Then I slid the sleeve across. The note-taker typed harder. The room felt colder. Rena asked if I was comfortable providing a written statement summarizing what I'd observed, with dates only and no personal commentary. I said yes. She asked if I could deliver it by end of day. I said I could deliver it within the hour. Rena nodded and said she would assign an internal case ID. She said this did not mean conclusions. She said it meant the evidence would be handled through compliance workflow. Workflow. That word made me breathe easier. Workflows don't care who flirts with whom. Workflows care who signed what, who approved what, and whether the numbers hold. The operations manager asked if I believed there was fraud. He looked like he wanted a yes or no to make his life simpler. I gave him neither. I said there were anomalies that warranted review. I said compliance should follow process. I said I was not making public claims. Rena thanked me, asked me to send my written statement, and ended the meeting without small talk. I left the room with my folder lighter by 2 pages and my mind heavier by one certainty. Tessa wasn't just cheating. She was moving through a system where cheating was cover. Cover for money, cover for influence, cover for a ladder she'd been climbing behind my back. Back at my desk, I wrote the statement the way Rena asked. Dates, observations, sources, no feelings, no adjectives. I attached scanned copies of my 1-page table and the 2 email headers, then sent it to the HR compliance address Rena provided. Within 5 minutes, a reply arrived with a case number and a short line confirming receipt. Receipt. Another stamped moment. Another room that keeps minutes. When I got home that evening, Tessa was waiting on the couch like she'd been sitting there for hours, posture stiff, eyes sharp. She didn't ask how my day was this time. She didn't offer dinner. She held her phone in both hands like a shield. She asked whether HR had contacted me. I didn't ask how she knew. I didn't need to. A man like Mike would not let a compliance ripple move without warning his assets. I told her HR was talking to several people. True. Then I added one small sentence that changed her breathing. I told her I gave them documents. Her face went pale in that familiar way, and the mask slipped far enough that I saw the fear underneath. Not fear of divorce. Fear of a file with a case number. Fear of a process she couldn't flirt her way out of. She tried to pivot into outrage. She tried to say I was ruining her career. She tried to say I was petty. She tried to say I was jealous and spiraling. I watched her, calm, and felt a dry sarcasm rise in my chest like a bitter laugh. She was still trying to make this about desire, because desire is the only battlefield she understands. I told her I wasn't ruining anything. I told her I handed HR a timeline. I told her timelines don't ruin people. Actions do. She stood up fast, like she wanted to create motion to break my calm. She said if I kept pushing, she would tell people things about me. She implied she could make me look dangerous. She implied she already had a story prepared. There it was, finally, the shape of the late twist beginning to show. Not a confession, not remorse, a threat built from narrative. I nodded slowly, like I was considering it. Then I said the only thing I needed to say. I told her if she wanted to tell stories, she should make sure her dates match her receipts. And for the first time, she didn't have an answer ready. She just stared, breathing shallow, realizing the door she'd been using to escape was starting to close. Her phone buzzed in her hands, and I saw the name flash on the screen before she could hide it. Mike. She didn't answer in front of me. She backed toward the hallway like a person retreating from a fire. I stayed on the couch, still calm, and listened to her footsteps fade, because now I knew the next move wouldn't be an apology. It would be a smear, and I had a case number that would outlive any lie she tried to spread. I heard her pacing in the hallway before I heard the call connect. Tessa always paced when she needed to feel in control. The apartment was quiet, but her footsteps made it sound crowded. She kept her voice low, then lower, like she believed walls were loyal. I stayed on the couch, still, breathing slow, letting her think I was not listening. I did not put my ear to a door. I did not record anything. I did not need a gadget to understand a plan when it uses the same shape every time. The shape was familiar. First, she would paint me as the problem. Second, she would recruit a witness. Third, she would move the fight into a room where I looked guilty before I spoke. She had already tested the words on me: controlling, scary, unstable. Now she was handing them to someone else to repeat with confidence. When she stepped into the living room again, her face looked rearranged. Calm on top, panic underneath. She held the phone like it was a weapon she wasn't sure how to aim. She did not apologize. She did not ask what I wanted. She only asked what I told HR and why I would do that to her. She made it sound like I had smashed a window, not handed over a timeline. I told her the same thing again, plain and dry. I said I provided documents about reimbursements and vendor anomalies. I said I did not make personal accusations. I said HR asked for proof, and I gave it. Then I waited. She tried another angle. She said I was obsessed. She said I was punishing her because she had goals. She said I was jealous of Mike's success. She said I was trying to ruin her career so she would be trapped with me. Her words were dramatic, but her eyes were calculating. She wasn't trying to be understood. She was trying to find the version of the story that would hurt me most. I told her I wasn't jealous. I told her I was tired. I told her I was done living inside her improvisations. The last sentence landed heavier than I expected. It wasn't anger, it was resignation. She heard it and flinched, like resignation was the one thing she couldn't weaponize. She left the room again, phone pressed to her ear, and I heard the quiet rhythm of another call. Mike again, or someone who served Mike. The important part was not the name, it was the urgency. People don't scramble like that when they are innocent. They scramble when a process starts moving without them. I went to my desk and opened my folder. I added a new page to the ledger, dated and signed, describing what happened in the simplest way. HR case number received. Wife confronted me. Wife threatened to tell stories about me. Wife contacted Mike immediately. No feelings, no labels, just sequence. Then I did the next clean step. I called Nora Klein. Nora is not the kind of lawyer who sells comfort. She sells leverage. Her voice is calm, and it makes other people sound unstable by comparison. She asked me to summarize, and I did it in 3 blocks. Household records, HR workflow, and my wife's shift in behavior once a case number existed. Nora did not gasp. Nora did not moralize. She asked one question that mattered. She asked whether Tessa had threatened to accuse me of abuse or instability in a formal setting. I told her yes, indirectly. Nora exhaled once, slow, like she'd seen this movie too many times. She told me to do 2 things tonight and nothing else. She told me to keep my distance and keep my documentation clean. She told me to sleep in the bedroom with the door unlocked and avoid any physical contact. She told me to communicate in writing as much as possible, but only about logistics, not emotions. Then she told me to come to her office in the morning with my folder. After the call, I sat in the dark living room and listened to the apartment settle. The TV was off. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car alarm chirped and died. Normal noises in a world that felt like it was tilting. Tessa returned from the hallway with her face set like stone. She told me she was going to stay with a friend for a few nights. She said she needed space from my paranoia. She said she felt unsafe. Unsafe. She pressed that word into the air, then watched my face for a reaction. I gave her the reaction she hated most. I asked which nights, and I asked for an address for logistics. No outrage, no pleading, just administration. She looked confused for a second, then angry. She said I didn't care. She said any normal husband would fight for his wife. She said my calm proved I never loved her. She wanted me loud. She wanted me messy. She wanted me to look like the story she was preparing. I told her I cared enough to stay quiet. I told her she could leave if she wanted. I told her I would not block the door. That last line made her eyes sharpen. She remembered the kitchen and the way her own threat had failed to control me. She grabbed her bag and left in a rush that felt staged. The door shut. The apartment went quiet. I stood there for a few seconds, not moving, letting the silence settle into my bones. Then I did what I always do when a system shifts. I checked the logs I was allowed to check. Not her phone, not her private accounts. My own. A merchant alert hit 15 minutes later. Rideshare charge. Same river condo zone, same pattern. She had not gone to a friend. She had gone to the routine. The betrayal wasn't even romantic anymore. It was mechanical. I saved the alert screenshot, printed it, signed the back, and placed it in a sleeve. I wrote one line in the ledger. Claimed friend stay. Charge indicates river zone immediately after departure. If she wanted to frame me as unstable, I would frame myself as boring. Boring is hard to indict. In the morning, I went to Nora's office with my folder under my arm like a textbook. The building lobby smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner. Nora met me at the door with the same face she uses for every client, a face that does not invite drama. She sat me down and reviewed the contents in silence, flipping pages the way a surgeon checks instruments. When she finished, she said we would file for separation today with a request for temporary financial boundaries. She said we were not accusing anyone of crimes in the divorce paperwork. She said the civil process was about protecting assets and stabilizing the household. She said if Tessa wanted to smear me, the best defense was structure, consistent behavior, written logistics, and a documented timeline. Then Nora asked about the HR case number. I showed her the email confirmation. Nora nodded and told me not to forward it to anyone else. She said HR would do what HR does, and my job was to stay clean. She drafted a short message for me to send Tessa. Not a love letter, not an ultimatum. A logistics note requesting that future communication be by text or email, and that any expenses beyond household necessities be discussed first. She also advised me to open a separate account for my paycheck and to stop using the shared card for anything except fixed bills until the court set rules. None of that was punishment, it was containment. Before I left, Nora asked me if I felt at risk of a false report. I didn't say yes. I said I felt at risk of a narrative. Nora said a narrative becomes dangerous when it meets an institution. Then she told me we would make sure my timeline met institutions first. On the way back to work, my phone buzzed with a new email from HR Compliance. Rena requested a follow-up meeting. 15 minutes, same room. She also asked me to bring any additional documentation related to reimbursements, vendor programs, or anything that linked a driver's personal expenses to procurement-controlled workflows. It was written in neutral language, but the subtext was clear. The review was accelerating. At the ops center, the air felt different. People were quieter. Laughter sounded forced. I noticed a few eyes on me, then away, the way people look when they sense a storm but don't know whose roof it will tear off first. Jade passed my station and paused, just long enough to speak without speaking. She asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. She nodded and walked away. That was the entire exchange. But in a room like this, even a nod can become a rumor. At lunch, I checked my phone and saw a public social post from a mutual acquaintance, vague and sweet, the kind of post that looks harmless until you read it with context. It said something about believing women and protecting peace. No names, no facts, just a soft call to judgment. My stomach tightened, not because I felt guilty, but because I recognized the move. She was planting mood before details. She was building the room. I did not comment. I did not message anyone. I took a screenshot of the post with the date stamp visible and saved it to my folder. If she wanted to spread fog, I would keep timestamps. The follow-up meeting with Rena was shorter than the first. Rena thanked me again, confirmed the case number, and asked if I had noticed any escalation or retaliation since I provided documents. I told her the truth. I said my wife had confronted me and threatened to tell stories about me. I said she had referenced procurement leadership as her support. I said she had left the home under a stated reason that did not align with a charge pattern. Rena did not flinch. She asked me whether I felt physically unsafe. I said no. I said I felt at risk of reputational harm through false claims. Rena nodded once and told the note-taker to capture that statement. Then she said something that made my spine straighten. She said the company takes retaliation and intimidation seriously, and they would document any claims made inside corporate channels. Corporate channels. That was the key. It meant if Tessa tried to spin a story through HR, it would sit beside my exhibits in the same file. Minutes do not care which story is prettier. Minutes care which story has dates. Rena asked whether I could provide one more item, the exact text of any message where my wife implied I was scary or controlling. I told her I would not fabricate anything, and I would only provide what existed in writing. Rena accepted that and told me to send any written logistics messages and responses once they occurred. I left the meeting and returned to my station with a strange calm. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't fighting a person. I was feeding a process. Processes are slow, but they are stubborn. That afternoon, Tessa finally texted me. The message was not an apology. It was a warning dressed as concern. She said she hoped I was getting help. She said she had talked to someone about my behavior. She said she didn't want this to get ugly, but she would protect herself if she had to. I read it twice, then did exactly what Nora told me to do. I replied with logistics only. I asked when she would return to collect essentials. I asked her to provide a list of items so I could place them in a bag. I asked her to confirm whether she planned to contribute to the fixed bills this week. Her response came fast, angry, full of emotion, and full of empty claims. She did not answer the bill question. She repeated the word unsafe. She hinted at telling people. She hinted at formal action. I saved the conversation thread, printed it, signed the back, and slid it into a sleeve labeled written threat pattern. Then I sat in my chair and let the sarcasm rise in my chest like bile. She was trying to build a narrative that I was dangerous, while she was the one moving money, hiding roots, and clinging to a man whose department was now under review. She wanted me to look like the monster so she could keep her access. I didn't need to call her out. I didn't need to argue. I just needed to keep doing what I was doing. Death by 1,000 truths. When I got home that night, the apartment looked the same, but it felt like a staged crime scene. Every object was innocent until it wasn't. I checked the mail and found a letter from the bank about account security preferences, the kind you get when someone changes alert settings or requests new verification. It was addressed to both of us. I hadn't requested anything. I didn't panic. I photographed the envelope beside a clock, then opened it carefully. It wasn't a new card. It wasn't a loan. It was a confirmation of updated contact preferences. Tessa was trying to move the financial levers. I called Nora, forwarded the photo, and said one sentence. I said she is touching the accounts. Nora told me to come in first thing tomorrow for an emergency motion to formalize temporary boundaries. She said this was exactly why we file early. She said I was doing it right. I hung up, sat at my desk, and added one more line to the ledger. Bank preferences changed without my request. Likely prelude to money shift. Legal containment needed. Then I looked at the town hall date on my calendar and felt that low alarm sharpen, because I could see the next phase forming. Mike would try to control the room. Tessa would try to control the story, and I would bring the only thing neither of them could charm: a record. The next morning I met Nora before the coffee shops even pretended to open. Her office building had that early hour smell of bleach and tired carpet, like the place was already apologizing for what it had to witness today. Nora didn't greet me with warmth. She greeted me with purpose. She took one look at the bank letter photo on my phone and made a decision without asking for my feelings. She said we would file an emergency request for temporary financial boundaries. She said it was not revenge, it was containment. She said the court likes adults who stop the bleeding before they argue about blame. Then she slid a simple one-page form across the table and told me to sign where the yellow tabs were. I signed. My pen didn't shake. That was the weird part. Months ago, I would have begged for normal. Now I was signing paperwork like it was overdue maintenance on a car that kept stalling. Nora asked for two things, and she asked for them the way professionals do, when they already know the answers will be ugly. She asked whether Tessa had any access to my payroll deposit. She asked whether she had ever had the passwords for any banking or household email accounts. I told Nora the truth. Shared life meant shared access. Shared access meant shared risk. Nora nodded once and said we would fix that without drama. She told me to redirect my paycheck to a new account and leave the shared account for fixed bills only until the court set rules. She told me to keep every change documented, because documentation turns panic into policy. Then she did the quiet thing that made my stomach tighten. She asked me to describe, in plain terms, the pattern of intimidation I expected next. I didn't dress it up. I told her Tessa was building a narrative about me. I told her she used words like unsafe and scary, but she used them as tools, not descriptions. I told her she wanted a room to prejudge me before facts arrived. Nora listened, expression flat, like I was describing weather. She said that kind of narrative often comes with a financial squeeze and a workplace squeeze. She said people who feel a compliance file closing around them start looking for any lever they can pull. She said my job was to remove levers. When I left Nora's office, I felt lighter and meaner, not in the violent way, in the procedural way. The world had shifted from emotions to paperwork, and paperwork is a language I can speak without bleeding. I went straight to the bank. The branch near my apartment always looked the same, no matter what season it was. Overlit, over-air-conditioned, full of people pretending they weren't nervous. Money makes everyone lie, even when they're silent. I stood in line behind an older man arguing about fees and a young couple whispering about overdrafts, and I watched the teller windows like they were stage lights. When it was my turn, I asked for a printed transaction summary for the shared account for the last 30 days. I didn't ask for anything exotic. I didn't demand secrets. I asked for what I owned. The teller checked my ID and printed the summary with that neutral face bank staff perfect over years of absorbing other people's disasters. I took the paper, glanced at it once, and felt the same cold confirmation I'd felt with every other exhibit. Not because of one shocking number, because of timing. 2 contact preference changes, 1 new verification step added, a new notice of a pending card replacement request marked as initiated but not completed. Someone had started moving pieces. I asked the teller to stamp the page as a customer copy, the way Nora taught me to ask for things that turn into evidence without turning into theater. The teller stamped it, slid it back, and told me to have a good day. Good day. I almost laughed. I thanked her anyway. I took the paper to my car, photographed it beside my steering wheel clock, then placed it in a clear sleeve. I wrote the date on the sleeve and signed the back of the printout. Boring. Repeatable. Defensible. At work, the ops center was quieter than it should have been. The normal jokes were missing. People were speaking in smaller voices. The kind of quiet that shows up before layoffs or after a scandal rumor starts to spread. I did my job first. I always did. Then, during a slower window, I checked the internal calendar for the town hall. It had moved up. Not by days, by hours. The event was now scheduled for mid-morning when attendance is higher and people are less likely to slip away. Leadership wanted full witness coverage. That told me 2 things. 1, something was coming. 2, they wanted control over how it landed. I saw Mike's name on the speaker list. I saw the title of his segment, a phrase that made my mouth go dry. Integrity in partnerships. If there is one thing I've learned from working around corporate announcements, it's that the opposite of the title is usually the real topic. Jade passed my station with her shoulders tight and her eyes steady. She didn't stop, but she lowered her voice just enough to thread a sentence into the air like a needle. She said HR had placed a quiet hold on several reimbursement approvals tied to procurement. She said Mike was furious. She said he had been demanding names. Demanding names means the room had stopped being friendly. I told Jade to keep her head down and save any official messages she received. She nodded and moved on, eyes forward, posture careful. She didn't want to be seen as my ally. I didn't want her to be. Allies get targeted. Witnesses just exist. Around noon, my phone buzzed with an email from Rena. Short, polite, sharp. She confirmed the compliance case remained active. She noted that any retaliation or intimidation would be documented. She asked me to forward any written threats or requests to change my statement. She ended with a line about attending the town hall and maintaining professionalism. Maintain professionalism is HR code for keep your face calm while we light a fire in public. I forwarded Rena a screenshot of Tessa's last message hinting she had talked to someone about my behavior. I did not add commentary. I attached the full thread. Then I stopped. Oversharing is how you become unreliable. When my shift ended, I went home to an apartment that felt like a staged set. Tessa wasn't there. She had taken the quiet option, disappear, then attack from a distance. The couch pillow she always punched into shape was slightly off. The kitchen drawer she liked was half open. Little signs of recent presence, like she wanted me to know she could enter, touch, and leave. I checked the mail again. Nothing new. I checked the bank app. No new contact preference changes, but the pending card replacement request still sat there like a cocked finger. Then my phone buzzed. Tessa texted me a single line, framed like concern. She said she needed access to the shared account tonight because she had to pay a work-related expense and would reimburse it later. Work-related expense. From the woman who couldn't produce a training confirmation email. I replied with logistics only. I told her any non-fixed expenses needed mutual approval until the temporary order was set. I told her she could email me the invoice header and I would review it. She responded fast, sharper, and with a shift I'd been expecting. She said I was financially abusing her. She said she had advice on how to handle men like me. She said if I didn't cooperate, she would do what she needed to feel safe. Safe again. That word was a hammer in her hand now. I didn't argue. I saved the thread, printed it, signed it, sleeved it. Then I sent Rena the screenshot and made one line in the email body. Spouse requested account access. I denied pending court order. Spouse used abuse language and implied escalation. No emotion, no story, just record. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Unknown numbers are bait when someone is trying to create a scene. If it was important, they could leave a message. If it was a trap, silence starves it. A voicemail arrived. No words I could use. Just breathing and a click. I saved the voicemail timestamp screen and labeled it as unknown call, no content. It might be nothing, but I was done letting nothing become something without proof. That evening I cooked for one and ate standing up, because sitting at our table felt like agreeing there was still a we. When I finished, I went to my desk and reorganized the folder. I didn't add new threads. I simplified. I pulled the cleanest exhibits to the front. Bank stamp page, contact preference letter, HR case receipt, reimbursement form photo, root zone summary, email headers, threat text thread, social post screenshot, a tight packet that could survive a skeptical reader, a packet that didn't need my voice to be persuasive. While I worked, a new email landed in my inbox from the company's internal comms team. It was the town hall reminder. It included a note about mandatory attendance and a warning about confidentiality. Confidentiality. They wanted silence, because silence is how leadership controls the narrative. But confidentiality also means they expect something worth leaking. That's how the world works now. Every scandal has two audiences, the room and the outside. A second email arrived 5 minutes later from HR compliance, not comms. It was sent only to a small distribution list. It advised that there would be no open Q&A at the town hall. It said questions would be collected through a form afterward. No Q&A means they were trying to prevent live cracks. It means someone had asked for a controlled environment. It also means someone was afraid of witnesses speaking in real time. I stared at the screen and felt that low alarm sharpen into something else. Not dread, not rage, readiness. Because Mike had built his power on controlling rooms. He controlled contracts. He controlled vendors. He controlled who got favored, who got squeezed, and who got erased. Tessa had hitched herself to that power like it was a life raft. But compliance files don't care who owns the microphone. They care who signed what, who approved what, and who benefited. And I had already fed the process. My phone buzzed again. A new text from Tessa, shorter, colder. She said she was meeting with someone tomorrow about my behavior. She said she would not be intimidated by my paperwork. She said I should be careful at work because people were starting to ask questions. I read it once and felt the sarcasm creep up like smoke. People were starting to ask questions, and she thought she could aim them at me. I replied with one sentence, neutral and clean. I told her any claims she wanted to make should be put in writing and sent to Nora. I told her I would communicate only about logistics. Then I put the phone down and looked at the town hall time again. Mid-morning tomorrow. If Mike was furious and demanding names, he would try to flip the board before the room heard the facts. If Tessa was planting a narrative, she would try to make me look unstable before I even walked into the building. I gathered my folder, selected the thinnest, cleanest packet, and placed it in my bag. Not to wave it around, not to threaten. Just to be ready if someone tried to rewrite reality in front of witnesses. I went to bed early, which felt wrong, like sleeping was surrender. But I didn't need to stare at the ceiling to prove I was serious. I needed my face calm and my mind clear when the room tried to break me. In the dark, I listened to the city outside and thought about how this all began with her wanting me to want her. Now she wanted me to be afraid? And tomorrow morning, under bright corporate lights, with integrity and partnerships on the screen behind Mike's head, I would find out whether fear still worked on him too. The next morning I woke before the alarm and lay still, listening for sounds that were not there. No keys, no shower, no humming from the kitchen. The apartment felt like a place someone had already moved out of, even though half her clothes still hung in the closet like a bluff. I dressed in the same plain way I always did for work. Nothing sharp, nothing loud. A man who looks like he wants attention invites stories. I had enough stories already. I checked my phone once, not for her messages, but for bank alerts. Nothing new. That meant she was waiting. Waiting is what people do when they think they can control timing. I ate a quick breakfast, packed my bag, and did one last audit of my folder. I didn't bring the whole archive. I brought the thinnest packet, the cleanest exhibits, the ones that could stand on their own. Bank-stamped summary, contact preference letter, HR case receipt, one-page timeline, a printed thread of her text where she used unsafe and implied escalation. I placed them in a sleeve and slid the sleeve into my bag like it was just paperwork for a boring meeting. Outside, the air had that winter bright bite that makes the city look honest. People walked fast, heads down, pretending their lives were simple. I drove to the office with the radio off because I didn't need anyone else's voice in my head today. The company building looked the same from the street, glass and steel trying to pass as neutral. Inside, it was already different. The lobby was fuller than usual, and the security guard who normally looked half asleep was awake and watching. People were arriving early, not because they were responsible, but because they wanted the best seats for whatever disaster was about to be served. I badged in, rode the elevator up, and walked into the ops center. The room was lit too bright for the hour. Screens flickered, headsets buzzed, but the human noise was muted. People spoke in small pockets and stopped when I walked by. Not because I was important, but because I was connected. In a building like this, connection is the closest thing to guilt. Jade was at her station, posture straight, eyes tired. She didn't wave, she didn't smile. She only nodded once toward the internal comms screen mounted near the break area. On it, a looping slide announced the town hall schedule, mandatory attendance, no open Q&A, questions submitted afterward. The slide looked calm. The room did not. I logged in and did my work. I refused to act like a man waiting for a verdict. I cleared the overnight queue, handled 2 early complaints, and coached a driver through a payment issue without letting my voice tighten. I could feel eyes on me now and then, measuring whether I looked nervous. Nervous is a costume people can interpret. Calm is harder. Half an hour before the town hall, an email arrived from HR compliance. Not the general address, directly from Rena. She asked me to come to the compliance office 10 minutes before the town hall. She wrote that it was a brief procedural check. No details. Procedural check is HR language for someone tried something. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked out with the same pace I used for coffee breaks. I did not rush. Rushing makes people curious. The compliance corridor smelled like toner again, that sterile scent of paper and consequences. Rena met me at the door, face neutral, and guided me into the same small room as before. The note-taker was there again. This time, a second HR person sat beside them, the kind of quiet watcher who doesn't speak unless a file needs to be sealed. Rena explained, in the same measured tone she used for everything, that a complaint had been submitted. She didn't say by whom yet. She said the complaint alleged intimidation and controlling behavior at home, with a claim that workplace contact might be used to retaliate. There it was. The narrative had finally walked into an institution. Rena asked if I had any response. She asked if I had made any threats. She asked if I had attempted to contact anyone in the company to harm another person's role. She asked it like a script, not because she believed it, but because procedure needs the questions asked. I answered cleanly. I said I had not threatened anyone. I said I had not contacted any coworker about my home life except in an operations context. I said I had provided documents related to policy and reimbursement anomalies when asked, and only through HR channels. I said I had kept communication with my spouse focused on logistics. Rena nodded and asked if I could provide the written messages where my spouse used unsafe language and implied escalation. I told her I could. I opened my bag, pulled out the sleeve, and slid the printed thread across the table. The note-taker began typing immediately. I watched their fingers move and felt a grim relief. Paper was winning. Rena asked one more question. She asked whether my spouse had access to the shared accounts and whether there had been any recent attempts to change financial settings without mutual agreement. I told her yes, and I placed the bank letter photo and the stamped summary on the table. Again, boring exhibits. Again, quiet impact. Rena did not react outwardly, but her eyes tightened slightly in that way professionals have when a story becomes clearer. She said the compliance case and the complaint would be handled in parallel. She said the company would document all claims on both sides. She said retaliation was taken seriously, including false claims designed to intimidate witnesses. False claims. She didn't say the words like an accusation. She said them like an option in a policy menu. But hearing them in this room mattered. It meant the institution had named the tactic. Rena then gave me an instruction that was also a shield. She told me to avoid personal contact with any procurement staff outside formal channels. She told me to communicate only through HR if approached about the compliance case. She told me to attend the town hall and maintain professionalism. Maintain professionalism again. It was almost funny now. As I stood to leave, Rena added one more line, quieter than the rest. She said the complaint had arrived shortly after the compliance case number was assigned. Timing. Always timing. I walked out of the office and headed toward the auditorium without stopping at my desk. The hallway outside the event space felt like a pre-show crowd. People clustering, eyes flicking, smiles too wide. Some faces showed curiosity. Some showed fear. Some showed the thrill people get when trouble doesn't belong to them. Inside the auditorium, the lights were bright and flat. A stage at the front. A screen behind it with the company logo rotating slowly, like the building was trying to hypnotize itself into calm. Rows of chairs filled quickly. I chose a seat off-center, not front row, not back. A seat where I could watch exits and watch faces. Old habits from a job that deals with movement. Jade sat 3 rows ahead of me, angled slightly so she could see the stage and the side door. She didn't look back. That was good. We were not a team. We were just employees in the same weather. Procurement staff arrived in a tight cluster near the front, walking like they owned the floor. They dressed sharper than ops because procurement lives in a world where appearance is leverage. I scanned for Mike and didn't see him yet. That absence made the air feel thinner. Then I saw Tessa. Not on stage, not in the front row. She stood at the side aisle near the back, half hidden by a column, wearing a coat that looked too expensive for a driver's overnight training. Her hair was done. Her posture was stiff. She held her phone at chest level like she was ready to film, but she wasn't filming yet. She was waiting for the right moment. She had come to the town hall. My jaw tightened, but my face stayed calm. Of course she came. If she wanted to build a narrative, she wanted witnesses. She wanted to look like the brave woman standing up to a controlling man. She wanted the room to see her before it saw the receipts. I didn't look at her for long. Looking is how you get trapped into a scene. I kept my eyes on the stage and let my peripheral vision do the rest. The comms host walked up first, voice too cheerful, posture too eager. They gave the usual opening about transparency and values. Then they introduced leadership. Ops leadership came out, smiled, said a few lines about teamwork. The room clapped on cue, because clapping is what you do when you want to belong. Then procurement leadership was introduced. A man I recognized from internal emails stepped out, not Mike. He looked tense. His smile didn't hold. He spoke about partnerships and integrity, and the words sounded like a rehearsed apology without an admission. He mentioned a review of vendor processes. He mentioned corrective action. He mentioned accountability. The room shifted. You could feel it. People lean forward when they hear accountability because they want to know whose head is on the block. Then the host introduced Mike. A pause. A beat too long. Mike didn't appear. The host held a smile that started to crack at the edges. They glanced off stage, waiting for a cue that didn't come. Then they adjusted and said there had been a schedule change. They said procurement would address integrity through a written follow-up. The room murmured, soft and hungry. Tessa's head snapped toward the side door like she expected Mike to enter with a grand flourish. When he didn't, her shoulders lifted slightly, a panic posture. She kept her phone still, but her hands tightened around it. Then HR stepped onto the stage. Not comms, not leadership. HR. Rena wasn't the one on stage, but the person who walked out had the same trained calm. They spoke in policy language, the kind that feels cold until you realize cold is fair. They said an internal review was active. They said certain approvals and reimbursements had been paused pending verification. They said employees should not speculate. They said questions would be handled through official channels. No names, no accusations, just the announcement that the system had taken control. A ripple moved through the room. People shifted in their seats. Some looked relieved. Some looked scared. A few looked excited in that ugly way people get when consequences are happening to someone else. I watched procurement staff in the front rows. They didn't clap. They didn't smile. Their bodies went still, the way bodies go still when a room becomes dangerous. I felt movement behind me and saw Tessa stepping toward the aisle, trying to position herself for visibility. She wasn't leaving. She was hunting a camera angle. A moment. She wanted to catch something she could spin later, something that proved she was the victim and I was the villain. So I stayed seated. I kept my hands open on my lap. Calm posture. Neutral face. If she wanted a clip of me looking aggressive, I wasn't going to give her one. The HR speaker finished and stepped off stage. The host tried to regain control with a forced smile and a line about focusing on our work. The town hall ended quickly after that, as if leadership wanted to shut the door before the room started asking real questions. People stood up in waves, not orderly, but cautious. Small groups formed instantly. Whispers began. I caught fragments in passing, nothing solid, but the shape was clear. Procurement, reimbursements, vendor pressure, ethics, suspension, audit. No one knew details, but everyone knew direction. As the crowd moved toward the exits, Tessa stepped into my path. She didn't touch me. She didn't shout. She used the move she thought was smarter. She stood close enough for others to notice and tilted her phone slightly as if she was about to record. Her eyes were wide in a way that looked fearful from a distance and calculating up close. She said something low, framed like a plea, aimed outward more than at me. She implied I was doing this to her. She implied I was ruining her life because I didn't want her. She implied I was obsessed. I didn't answer. I didn't speak at all. I did the simplest thing a man can do when someone tries to bait him into a scene. I stepped to the side, gave her a clear path, and kept walking. No contact, no reaction, nothing a camera could inflate. The move worked, but not the way she wanted. People noticed, not because of my face, but because of her posture. She had come to perform, and when the performance didn't get a response, it looked like what it was, a performance. Jade appeared near the lobby doors, eyes scanning. She saw the interaction and kept her face blank. That mattered. Neutral witnesses are the best kind. I walked out into the hallway and headed back toward ops, but I didn't get far. A procurement assistant intercepted me, pale and shaking, and asked if I had seen Mike. The question came out wrong, too urgent, too personal. I said I had not. I said they should speak with HR. Then I kept walking. Halfway to ops, my phone buzzed with a new message from Nora. Short, direct. She said the emergency motion had been accepted for review and a temporary hearing was scheduled within days. She said the court would likely grant a boundary order given the bank preference changes and the intimidation pattern. She told me to stay calm and stay documented. I put the phone away and reached the ops center, but the room wasn't working like usual. People were gathered in small clusters, pretending to talk about rides, but really talking about procurement. Even the screens felt quieter, as if the algorithms had noticed the humans were distracted. I sat at my station and logged in. My hands moved automatically. A passenger complaint popped. I resolved it. A driver dispute came in. I handled it. Normal work in abnormal weather. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was Tessa, a text sent 3 minutes after the town hall ended. She said the company was turning on her because of me. She said she had already reported my behavior and would escalate if needed. She said I should stop before it was too late. I stared at the message and felt something settle deep in my chest. Not fear, not anger, but clarity. She wasn't trying to save herself. She was trying to burn the floor under me so I couldn't stand while her world collapsed. I didn't reply. I saved the message, printed it, signed it, and slid it into my folder. Then I looked up at the internal comms screen and saw a new alert posted quietly, not for the crowd, but for those who knew how to read. Procurement approvals paused. Vendor partnership review ongoing. Compliance contact for questions, no names, no spectacle, just a system tightening. And somewhere in that tightening, Mike had vanished from the stage. I leaned back in my chair and watched the room spin stories in real time. Because now the question wasn't whether Tessa and Mike were exposed. The question was what Mike would do next to save himself, and who he would throw under the bus first. After the town hall, the building felt like it had swallowed a secret and was choking on it. People went back to their desks and pretended to work, but the quiet was wrong. It was the kind of quiet you hear in an elevator when everyone knows someone is getting fired and nobody wants to be the first to breathe. I stayed in ops and did my job because routine is my only shield. The queue kept moving, complaints came in, drivers argued about payout zones, passengers demanded refunds like the world owed them one. Normal chaos, but underneath it was a second system spinning up, colder and slower, and every person in the room could feel it. Tessa's last text sat in my phone like a loaded sentence. She had threatened escalation. She had warned me it would get ugly. She had done it right after the company announced the review. The timing was a confession, even if the words weren't. I printed the message during a break, signed the back, and slid it into my folder. Then I locked the folder in my desk drawer and went back to the screen like nothing happened. That was the point. I wanted anyone watching to see a man with no emotional spikes, no outbursts, no theatrics. A man who simply keeps working. Around mid-afternoon, the first real ripple hit ops. A short internal alert popped up on the comms feed. Procurement approvals remained paused. Vendor partnership review ongoing. Any questions routed to HR compliance. It looked like a generic reminder, but it landed like a warning. It told everyone the company was not drifting. It was steering. A few minutes later, Jade walked past my station again and paused like she was tying her shoe. She didn't look at me directly. She kept her gaze on a random wall poster and spoke in a voice that could pass as background noise. She said Mike had been removed from the speaker lineup because he was in a closed meeting with HR and legal. She said he had come out of that meeting pale and sweating. She said he didn't go back to his floor. He left the building through a side exit. I didn't ask questions. Questions make people feel involved. Involved people get targeted. I only nodded once and returned to my screen. If Mike ran, it meant he couldn't control the room anymore. A man like him doesn't fear gossip. He fears process. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Tessa. Longer, more controlled. She framed it like a plea but wrote it like a plan. She said she had talked to someone at the company and they were concerned about my behavior. She said if I kept contacting HR, she would be forced to protect herself. She said she could not believe I would do this to her. I read it once and felt a dry sarcasm rise, not because it was funny, but because it was obvious. She had chosen her weapon. She had picked language that sounds like virtue from a distance and sounds like manipulation up close. I did not reply. Not yet. I forwarded the screenshot to Rena with a one-line note. Spouse implied company contact and threatened escalation again. Then I returned to the queue. I could feel the temptation to fight her on the phone, to point out the lies, to demand answers, to rip the mask off. That temptation was exactly what she wanted. It would create a scene she could use later. I starved it. At the end of my shift, my manager pulled me aside and asked if I could stay late. Not because of work volume. Because the building was still buzzing and leadership wanted ops stable. They wanted the department to look calm while procurement burned. I stayed. I handled the late rush. I listened to drivers complain about demand zones like they weren't standing on top of a scandal. I smiled at the irony and kept my face neutral. When I finally left, the lobby was nearly empty. The security guard watched me a little too closely, not suspiciously, but curiously, as if he'd been told a story and was checking whether it matched my posture. I nodded at him the way I always do, small, polite, consistent. Consistency is a quiet defense. Outside, the air had gone colder. I drove home with my headlights cutting through thin fog. Every stoplight felt longer than it should have, and every red light gave my mind a chance to play out the next move. Tessa would not let this end quietly. Mike would not let himself be the only one burned. Somebody would try to force a narrative into the file before the file sealed. When I got home, the apartment was dark. No Tessa, no dramatic waiting on the couch. That was almost worse. Silence is where she worked best. I turned on one lamp and checked the mail. A single envelope sat on top, addressed to me. Not both of us, just me. The return address was the company's HR department. My stomach tightened, but my hands stayed steady. I photographed the envelope beside the clock on my microwave, then opened it carefully. It wasn't a termination notice. It was a formal instruction. It stated that due to an active compliance review, certain employees might be contacted for additional statements. It reiterated confidentiality. It also included a line about avoiding personal contact with individuals involved in the review. Individuals involved. Not named, but named enough. I set the letter on my desk and felt the strange calm that comes when something becomes official. When institutions write words, those words start to outlive people. I received another bank alert 10 minutes later. A small charge attempt on the shared card declined due to a security preference update. That preference update was mine, executed earlier with Nora's guidance. It wasn't vengeance. It was containment now doing its job. A minute after the alert, Tessa called. I let it ring out. Then she texted, fast and sharp. She demanded to know why the card declined. She accused me of trapping her. She accused me of trying to starve her. She said she had proof of my behavior and would use it. I replied with logistics only, as Nora instructed. I told her the shared account remained available for fixed bills. I told her any other expenses must be approved until the temporary order was set. I told her to email an invoice header if it was work-related, and I would review it. I kept the tone boring. Boring can't be clipped into a dramatic screenshot. Her response came back with the word unsafe again, this time paired with a threat to contact my employer about harassment. It was almost impressive how quickly she tried to turn boundaries into abuse. I saved the thread, printed it, signed it, sleeved it. Then I sat down and forced myself to do a simple thing. I wrote a one-page incident log, not for drama, but for Nora and the court. Date, time, event, proof. No adjectives, no feelings. A man's life translated into a table. Halfway through writing, my doorbell rang. Not a knock. Not a neighborly tap. A firm ring, then a second, impatient. My shoulders tightened. I didn't rush. I walked to the door slowly and looked through the peephole. Tessa stood in the hallway in her coat, hair neat, face set like she had rehearsed this. Beside her stood a man I didn't recognize, older, posture official, holding a clipboard. Not a cop, no uniform, just someone with paperwork energy. She looked up at the peephole as if she knew I was watching and wanted me to feel caught. I opened the door halfway, kept the chain on, and said nothing. I didn't invite them in. I didn't block them physically. I just held the boundary. The man introduced himself as a process server and stated he had documents for me. Tessa stood slightly behind him, eyes bright, as if she was watching a show she'd paid for. He slid the papers toward the gap. I took them calmly, still not speaking, and looked at the top page. It was a civil filing notice. Not a restraining order, not a criminal claim, a request for a temporary protective boundary based on alleged intimidation and financial control. It also included a request that I limit contact and move out temporarily. A move-out request. That was her play. Force me out, claim the home, claim the narrative, then act like she survived something. I didn't react outwardly. I simply nodded at the process server, thanked him, and closed the door. The chain stayed on until the door clicked shut. Then I locked it and stood still for a few seconds, letting the moment settle. My hands didn't shake. My jaw did slightly, because rage likes to hide in muscle. I forced it down. Rage would only help her. I sat at my desk, photographed the served documents beside the clock, then called Nora immediately. Nora answered on the second ring, voice calm, like she'd been expecting exactly this. I told her what I'd received, and she didn't sound surprised. She asked me to scan the filing and send it. She told me not to respond to Tessa directly about it. She told me to keep the chain on the door if she returned. She told me to leave the apartment only if the court ordered it. She told me we would file our response first thing in the morning. Then Nora said something that made my breath slow down. She said the timing of Tessa's filing was suspicious and useful. She said it happened right after my HR documents landed and right after the bank boundary held. She said courts notice timing. She said judges don't like filings that look like leverage rather than protection. Leverage. That word again. It followed Tessa everywhere because she lived by it. After the call, I scanned the documents, emailed them to Nora, and added a new line to my ledger. Served with civil boundary request after account containment and HR escalation. Evidence attached, bank alert, text threats, HR letter. Then I checked my phone and saw 3 missed calls from an unknown number. No voicemail. I checked again, and a new email had arrived in the shared household inbox. It was from a vendor address I recognized from the earlier hotel receipt. The subject line mentioned an updated invoice and a reimbursement reference number. It had been sent to the shared inbox again, the one Tessa had used as a dumping ground. I opened only the header and the first visible line. It showed a date, a total, and a reference number tied to procurement reimbursement. Nothing scandalous, just enough to say the machine was still running, even while the company was trying to stop it. I saved the email header, printed it, signed it, sleeved it. Tessa had come to my door with paper designed to make me look like the threat. And now, on the same night, another piece of boring proof had landed in my house showing she was still trying to route expenses through the same channels. I leaned back in my chair and let a cold thought settle into place. Mike had vanished from the stage. Tessa had launched a civil attack. The company had tightened procurement approvals. The vendor receipts kept arriving. This wasn't just an affair anymore. It was a collapse. And the only question left was who would try to rewrite the minutes first. I turned off the lamp, went to bed fully dressed in a plain shirt, and left my phone on the nightstand with the screen facing up. Because tomorrow would not be about my marriage. Tomorrow would be about which record the world believed. My name stayed off the stage, but my documents did not. The next morning, HR summoned procurement, ops, and a vendor rep into a conference room with the blinds open and a note-taker already seated. No speeches, no Q&A, just procedure. Each chair had a thin packet face down, and the first page in every packet was the same one-page timeline I built at my desk. I arrived early and sat near the side wall, hands visible, posture neutral. Tessa came in last, dressed like she was headed to a celebration, then slowed when she saw the packets. Mike entered behind her, trying to look relaxed, but his eyes kept landing on the note-taker's laptop. He wanted control of the room, and the room belonged to minutes. The compliance lead opened with policy language and asked for confirmations, one fact at a time. I watched Tessa's confidence drain as dates were read. Not accusations, just dates. The vendor rep confirmed they had been pressured into add-ons and pointed to reimbursement reference numbers that matched the email headers in the packet. HR placed a stamped transaction summary on the table and asked who initiated the contact preference changes. Mike tried to redirect to process confusion, but his tone turned. Tessa tried to pivot toward me, framing me as the source of chaos, but the compliance lead kept the scope locked to reimbursements, timing, and approvals. My phone stayed in my pocket. My folder stayed closed. I only slid one additional page forward when asked, the printed text where she implied escalation at work. The note-taker typed a line that felt like a door closing, in black ink. Even the HVAC hum sounded like a verdict. Then the late twist snapped into view. Mike attempted to blame Tessa for initiating everything, implying she used him, not the other way around. He did it to save himself, and it exposed exactly how disposable she was to him. Tessa went still, realizing her shield was a man already backing away. HR ended the meeting with a suspension notice for Mike pending investigation, effective immediately, and a directive for procurement to freeze his approvals. Tessa was placed on administrative leave and barred from the building without escort. The compliance lead confirmed the evidence was received, logged, and forwarded to legal for civil recovery options. Nobody yelled, nobody begged. The silence did the work. Outside the conference room, Tessa tried one last move, a public plea meant for witnesses. I did not answer. I handed Nora's court filing receipt to the receptionist at the legal desk, asked for a stamped copy, and walked away. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone showed the court's temporary order granting financial boundaries and denying her move-out request. I stepped through the revolving door, felt the cold air hit my face, and understood the final irony. She once told me the door would always be open. Today, every door she used closed on record.